Did you see how high that thing bounced?
Yeah, I did.
Just like concrete. Sorry, Josh.
Wow.
But we had to get over the water today.
She was extremely intoxicated at a .04. Cocaine never really went away, but yet it kind of lost its popularity.
Should have brought a hammer and some nails. All right, welcome to another episode of Cops and Convicts. I'm Rodney Bamford, and our co-host Josh is not with us today. No, the cops didn't get him and take him away. He's out with the flu. So today we have Chuck Hayes, a very special guest, longtime friend. Chuck's a retired captain from the Oregon State Police and is vital in DUII enforcement and legislation throughout the state of Oregon and nationally, quite honestly. He was one of the first drug recognition experts in the state of Oregon.
Yes, the first.
And taught many classes, one of which I went through back in 1998. The date ourselves a little bit.
Yes.
But, we're going to talk about DUII enforcement and legislation surrounding DUII today, and try and hit some good golf balls in this frigid weather.
Yep.
So we'll go guest first.
Sure. All right. Tee it up, huh? Maybe.
Thank you.
Back edge.
Oh my goodness gracious. The ground's so frozen, I barely had a tee in there.
I think we got two of them up there. Close.
Somewhat close. Yeah. So Chuck, when did you start in law enforcement?
Actually, I started as a 19-year-old with the Ontario Police Department back in 1972, if you can believe that.
So I've seen a lot of change in my career. I can't imagine some of the change that you've seen.
Yeah, as a 19-year-old, going to work for Ontario, I started out as a dispatcher, and then as a 20-year-old, actually went out onto patrol and for the city of Ontario. You can't do that anymore, but back in the day, you could get away with that, I guess. So that's how I kind of got started. I worked there for about 18 months, then I went to work for the state police, the Oregon State Police, as a 21-year-old.
And then you were with them until you retired in what year?
Yeah, I retired in 2003. And I retired in 2003 and was stationed in Bend as a recruit. They hadn't seen a recruit in Bend in 25 years, so I was quite the oddity when I showed up there.
And then, so you were a recruit, and then you went out on, after training, went out on the road.
Yes.
And then we were talking earlier, and you developed a passion for DUI enforcement, right, or driving under the influence of intoxicants enforcement,
yeah,
on Christmas Eve.
Yeah, actually, so a number of things happened during my career that kind of really pointed me towards the urgency of really doing DUI enforcement. So we call it DUII here in Oregon. We're one of the only states that do that, but the same thing as DUI, or driving under the influence of intoxicants. And so even at Ontario, I was dispatched to a fatal crash that happened out on the freeway on the interstate there going through Ontario. And that was my first dealings with an impaired driver. And so that subject, the driver, he died in the crash, but he was definitely under the influence of alcohol when he hit a concrete abutment and actually died. And then when I went to the state police, it was early on in my career. In fact, it happened about in the early 80s, and it was a two-car fatality that occurred on Highway 97 on Christmas Eve. And I remember being dispatched to that crash and arriving there and seeing just the horrific sign of that crash and just everything that was just kind of a mess and torn apart and people standing all over the place on Christmas Eve. And 3 people died. And if we found out that one of the drivers in that crash had actually crossed the center line and hit a Jeep Wagoneer head on and killed both of those people in that crash. We later found out that he had a blood alcohol concentration that was a 0.17, so it was pretty high.
Over double
Yes.
Oregon's current limit.
Yes. And so that kind of really just got me going on the need that in law enforcement we needed to be doing much better job than what we were doing, because the irony of that whole thing is that driver had been stopped by another police officer. And I'm not going to say when or where, but he had been stopped prior to that crash, and for some reason was not arrested or determined to be under the influence. And then later on was found that he had actually been involved in that crash. So we don't know if it was a day or two or the same day or whatever, but we'll never know that.
That's the sad thing.
It is.
And I've seen that throughout my career is an officer will stop somebody an hour or two beforehand, not arrest them,
Yes.
and then either I stop them and would end up arresting them, or there would be a crash involved with that person. And we don't know if the person was impaired or not at the time of the previous stop. All we know is that they were impaired at the time of that stop or that crash.
It made me see that we just needed to make sure that law enforcement knew what to look for at roadside for impairment. Because there was another time when I actually stopped a semi-truck driver, and it was the middle of the day, and later found out that driver was under the influence of drugs. And I didn't know what to look for back in those days, those early days, and so I ended up letting that driver go. And I wish I'd have never done that.
Yeah, I can think of half a dozen of those myself until I started going through the drugs impaired driving courses and DRE school, and then it makes a difference. So we'll get into that a little bit more as we go. Tell us a little bit about the DRE program. Where did it come from?
Sure.
When did it start?
Well, the Drug Recognition Expert Program was something I heard about when I was with the state police, and I was a young trooper, and so I heard that it was a program that was started in Los Angeles with the Los Angeles Police Department. And so in the 80s, they developed this program where they could train officers, and it's really some really comprehensive training on the different drug categories and looking for different indicators of impairment. And so I was invited to go down, and the state police said, yeah, we'll send you down. So I went through the training in Los Angeles, and actually went through it twice, and which was kind of funny. And then so I came back to Oregon, trained as a drug recognition expert, and so I started using those skills, and where I would be able to look at impaired drivers that were impaired on substances other than alcohol. And so at that time, there was a lot of different, cocaine was very popular, and some of the hallucinogens were very popular up here in Oregon. And so starting doing evaluations on these people that were suspected of being under the influence of drugs. And so we actually got the program started here in Oregon in 1995. That was the very first school that we had here in the state of Oregon, where we trained 24 officers from around the state.
And where this is important for the viewers to know is prior to this program coming into the state, officers couldn't testify on the stand in a DUI hearing about what, as an expert, as to why a person was impaired.
Yes.
And then once the program was instrumented, there were some court battles that took place, and we finally got the ability to testify if we qualified in court as an expert to give our expert opinion on what category of drug the person was taking, and whether or not they were impaired.
Yeah. About that time in those early 80s, about 1983, 84, there was a lot of things that were going on around the country. And so one of them was there were so many fatalities and deaths that were being attributed to impaired driving, especially alcohol impaired driving, that a lot of the states started working on different things to maybe be able to do a better job when it came to DUI enforcement. And so one of them was in 1983, here in Oregon, we were, along with Utah, we were the first two states to actually pass a 0.08 blood alcohol concentration. And so that kind of got us started. And then I heard about the drug recognition program out of Los Angeles, and so that came along after that. So really about 1983, that's when we really started making some progressive, positive movements here in Oregon when it came to some of those things, where we'd be better equipped to look for impaired drivers and detect an impaired driver. And DRE, drug recognition, was definitely one of them.
That's great.
Look at there. It's a pretty good shot.
Did you see how high that thing bounced?
Yeah, I did.
Just like concrete. Got a big old clump of stuff right there.
Whoop.
We're just going to pick that up. We mentioned the legal limit in Oregon and
Right.
a lot of other states now is .08. And I know there's a lot of people out there that think, oh, if I can't even go out and have two beers or a couple of cocktails with dinner and not be over the legal limit. That's just really not the case for most people.
No, it isn't, and I know a lot of people do think that. And so, I mean, there's been so many studies and the scientific research supports it that you're not. I mean, unless you're a 100-pound person, you know, and you're drinking on an empty stomach, okay, 2 drinks in an hour may impair you, but yet you probably wouldn't even be to that legal limit, or what we call the per se limit here for impairment in Oregon. So, and I can tell you too that it really is not going to change enforcement that much, and it doesn't change the training that police officers get, and it really doesn't affect the alcohol industry either, because Utah is probably the best example of that. So when we went from 0.10 to 0.08 here in Oregon, well, the same thing was being said back in those days as well. And so now Utah has actually been the first state to go to 0.05. And one of the things that it's done is it's definitely had an impact on people in going out and being more careful about how much they consume if they're going to drive. So that's been a very good deterrent measure. And then also, I think as far as the alcohol industry, they didn't see any less sales of alcohol in Utah as a result of that new law change. So that didn't affect it either.
Well, and I think you hit on a key aspect of this. When officers are investigating impaired drivers, they're not doing tests and necessarily looking for them to be over the .08. They're looking for impairment. And what is impairment? Impairment is the inability to perform divided attention tasks. So,
right.
When you're driving, it's checking your mirrors and staying, what's behind you while looking what's in front of you, and keeping your car within the lines and being able to drive, at a safe speed under the speed limit.
Yep.
And so, in the officers in Oregon, we don't give preliminary breath test roadside to determine if the person is over the legal limit. Instead, they use a standardized field sobriety test.
Yes.
And
yep, we were one of the very first states too in the country to actually train officers in the standardized field sobriety testing, and the reason for that is because we didn't do, and we still don't do, roadside preliminary breath testing devices, just like you said. And I think that the key here too is that as we train officers throughout the state, throughout the nation, throughout the world actually, is that we're looking for impairment. We're not really basing it on a blood alcohol percentage or a breath test result, because some people can be impaired at even less than a 0.08 or less than a 0.05. So I can recall one of the DUI arrests that I did as a trooper in Bend. This young lady, she blew a 0.04, but yet if you would have really compared her impairment to other people that had even higher blood alcohol concentrations or breath tests, she was extremely intoxicated at a 0.04. And so a lot of it just depends upon the person, their tolerance, and those kind of things, and how much they drink, and if they're drinking on an empty stomach, definitely.
yeah, and the impairment is the key, because like you said, I've arrested people that were at that 06, that 08 mark, and they were falling down, drunk. And then I've arrested somebody that you would look at them and say, oh, maybe a little bit of impairment, but when they actually took the breath test, they're a 0.35.
Yes.
And so it's not a one size fits all.
No.
It's about impairment and your ability to perform divided attention tasks.
That's right.
And so you talk about Utah going to an 05. There's some legislation in Oregon now.
Well, I also chair the Governor's Advisory Committee on DUI and DUII, and so one of the legislative concepts that we are hoping that will be looked at very strongly here in Oregon as we start the new legislative session is actually lowering our blood alcohol concentration at per se level from 0.08 to 0.05, just like Utah. So we're not the only states that's doing that. So Hawaii and Washington have introduced bills that are in their legislature right now that are being considered at 0.05. Connecticut, Michigan, New York, there's other states as well that are looking at it. So we know eventually someday that we're going to see 0.05 here in the United States, and it's going to be catching up to the rest of the world, really, because there's a lot of countries throughout the world that have 0.05 right now. And I think that's where we need to be going. It may not be in this legislative session, but in the future, and especially as more states do that.
And when you talk about the per se limit, so for the lay person, the per se limit is the law says you are considered to be under the influence or guilty of DUII if your blood alcohol limit is 0.05% or
Yes.
right now 0.08.
Yes. And just because a person has a blood alcohol percentage, let's say right now they were arrested and it's a 0.08 or 0.09 or 0.10, again, even though they're above the per se level, that doesn't actually mean that they're under the influence. And so it can be contested, and so that's why we see many officers going to court, because maybe that there's some sort of defense so that that person was under the influence or maybe not under the influence.
Yeah. Were they impaired to a perceptible degree?
Exactly. Yeah. And so we're running into the same thing too with drugs, because drugs other than alcohol, as we talked about with the DRE program here in Oregon and throughout the country. So there's a big movement right now to look at cannabis or THC, marijuana. And so to have a blood level that if you were above a certain nanograms in the blood of THC, well, then you'd be automatically guilty of driving under the influence of cannabis or marijuana. Well, you can't really do that either. I mean, the research does not support that. The scientific community doesn't support it. So I'm hoping here in Oregon that our legislators, as we look at this later on down the road, is that we do not put a number, a numerical level on impairment with drugs. And so it's just too difficult to do because there's so much unknown.
Well, and that brings up so many other issues, and that we want to get into today, and that talks about blood draws and the legal system and
Yes.
and how all of that works. And it's and the reality for it is we want to save lives out on the road, and we can do that by arresting drunk drivers and getting them off the road, or impaired drivers and getting them off the road. But in my 30-year career, it's gotten a lot more difficult.
It is.
And it's even getting worse. But there are some tools that the officers are going to need moving forward, and we'll talk about that as we go on.
Good.
Oh.
Am I still up, or you got it now?
Oh, you're still up.
Okay.
But it would be remiss if we didn't mention Josh on this hole. This is the infamous eighth hole. And Josh, when he plays well, for whatever reason, still struggles on this hole and puts one in the water. So
I have some friends that also do not like this hole either. I think the issue is going to be getting a tee in the ground.
Should have brought a hammer and some nails. And
there we go. I got a spot. You might want to use that same spot. Look at there, left side along the cart path.
Well, that was smart.
Less walking. That's a good drive there.
Sorry, Josh.
Wow.
We had to get over the water today.
Yeah, DUI enforcement has sure changed through the years. I think back in the day when we were doing it, you could pretty much knock out an arrest and get your reports done within a couple hours, maybe 3 hours at the most, and be ready to go out and do it again. But nowadays, it's definitely changed, and a lot more work involved.
Yeah, it is a lot more work. I mean, and I remember when I was a youngster, first starting, the older guys would, didn't like doing DUIs. They talked about how complicated they were. And I was looking at them going, it's not that complicated. And, I'd go out and make 2, 3, 4 DUI arrests in a single shift. And they were just shaking their head at me. And,
Yes.
And then, and I continued arresting a lot of DUIs until late in my career, but I even got to the point where it was becoming so complicated and time consuming that it was hard to get yourself to go out and actually hunt for DUIs.
Yeah, it's there's some officers I've heard them say it's like, doing a DUI investigation is more difficult than doing a murder investigation or an assault investigation anymore.
Yeah, especially with all the case law that you have to stay up with. What did you have for your yardage?
138.
There's a good looking shot.
And I think you know from your experience too, that doing a drug impaired driving arrest and doing that from start to finish, that's even more difficult. And because there's just so many sometimes unknowns with drugs other than alcohol, or what we're seeing today, not only here in Oregon, in fact, Oregon is one of the highest states in the country when it comes to poly drugs. And so that's multiple drugs being used at the same time. And so that even kind of makes it more difficult. Look at there, a couple of good shots.
Well, there was a...
We like those shots.
Yeah, let's see if we can take advantage of them. Oh, nice putt.
Just a little more speed, maybe.
Good par. Well,
good par.
In golf, when somebody says good par and they give you that, you usually pick it up.
You think we're clear there?
I see a head still. I think you're okay. There's a good ball. That's going to run down there. Every time I, jeez. Wow. I'm going to break my tee just getting it in the ground. Every time I crank these things down, I feel like I'm in the old 80s Reebok commercials with the pumped up Reeboks. Oh no, that's trouble. Oh, keep going, give me a window. It's a long ways to walk though.
Okay, so you're going to be closer to 160 then.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Take a few clubs. So while we're waiting. So earlier we were talking about the blood draws and how tough it is sometimes. And for the general viewer, most of the time, well, in the past, it's slightly changed now, but we would do blood draws. Generally when there was a car crash to determine, and they weren't able to take a breath test when somebody was under arrest for DUI. Now the trend is when people are refusing the breath test at the time of arrest, and so now officers are having to write and apply for search warrants to take them to a hospital to get a blood test done. And I know when I was leaving, there was even some pushback from some of the hospitals in actually drawing blood, even under the guise of a search warrant.
Still is.
Still, officers are still having that problem.
It hasn't changed. In fact, it's starting to become more common around the state, and so there are a number of major hospitals that are really weighing this as to whether or not they want to do that, even when the officers show up with a search warrant. And so, like you said, the officers are investigating a serious injury crash, and so now the person was taken to the hospital, the driver suspected of being under the influence, and so they're not able to get a breath test, and so they're going to try to get blood, obviously, is what you would do in the investigation. And so because of that pushback and because of that resistance from some of the different medical facilities around the state of Oregon, we're looking at now, okay, what can we do? What can we maybe pass a law? Is there something that we can do to help the officers to be able to get that evidence in a timely manner? And so many states around the country are now moving to phlebotomy programs where they train police officers, and many of them are drug recognition experts, by the way, where they're trained to be a phlebotomist where they can actually take the blood, and so or collect the blood. And so Arizona, Utah, or probably Idaho, close to us, are the key examples, and they have very successful programs, and it's working quite well. And so that is something that I think, again, as you look down the road here for the Oregon legislature, I think we're going to need to look at that. And we need to be able to look at that because, first of all, it's not always the hospital or the medical facility's fault, because we go sometimes with a crash investigation and they are shorthanded with medical staff, and so they've got a lot of other things that are happening in that emergency room. And for us to show up now and say, okay, we need to try to get blood from this individual, okay, they got so many things going on and maybe they can't do it. Maybe they aren't able to really help us in a timely manner. So why not have officers trained that could do it maybe instead, and then would alleviate those issues?
Yeah, I agree. And then it does help with the criminal case. And again, it's not necessarily to put sometimes good people or bad people away in jail, because it's finding out the answers to what happened and then holding people accountable and providing some justice to victims. It's not just for the state or the officers to get a conviction. Yeah. It's to help hold people accountable, and then which gets them sometimes in some court mandated treatment when they didn't.
Exactly. I think that's really a key here too, because we're talking a lot about enforcement and what officers can do and should do and what we can help them do. But I'll tell you, we cannot forget, though, is that by getting that person, if they're arrested, and getting them into the judicial system, okay, that is eventually going to lead to some sort of treatment where we can get those people, again, where they can go through some treatment if they've got an alcohol or drug impairment problem or abuse problem. And so we can't forget that, because that is such a key part of it. I can tell you in my career, I did arrest people sometimes multiple times for driving under the influence, the same person. And usually it was because after talking to them, they did not complete their treatment, or for some reason or another, they weren't held accountable to do that. And so I think this is all part of that accountability. And so it was very satisfying to me that when I would maybe run across somebody that I had arrested for DUII, and then to find out that, okay, they had gone through their treatment and that had been a world of difference in their lives.
Yes. Yeah, that makes a huge difference. And it's a good feeling for the officer, too.
It's a tremendous feeling to know that they really got something out of it, and that treatment actually worked and helped them to not reoffend.
We'll continue this when I get back from my hike.
Okay. I think the people that were ahead of us, the group that was ahead of us, probably didn't appreciate my ball down there, like right next to where that guy was hitting.
Too much. Get down. I think I'm in the beach. So earlier, you touched on it a little bit about like diversion. We've talked about where in diversion as it relates to DUI is where somebody is arrested for DUI, and then instead of going through a criminal process, they enter into a diversion agreement where they will go take drug and alcohol classes, and then upon successful completion of those and paying some fines, and then staying out of trouble for, I think it's a year, it's as though the DUI arrest never happened.
Right. It's basically off their record, yes.
Yeah. And then there's no other enhanced penalties unless they are arrested or again within a 5-year period for DUI. I'm curious of what I have my thoughts on diversion. I'm curious what yours are from a enforcement and accountability standpoint, because if somebody goes through diversion and they fail to complete drug and alcohol classes, or fail to we're blinking, or they fail to pay their fines and they're held basically in contempt of court, now they have the option to go back and before the judge and plead not guilty, and then have the whole thing go through a trial process. And sometimes we're talking a year, 2-3 years later. What are your thoughts with that and how the current law reads for that?
Well, I can tell you that when diversion first came about here in Oregon, I was a little bit skeptical of that. But the thinking is that a first-time offender, maybe that goes out, makes a mistake, gets behind the wheel, okay, maybe give them a break, and so that DUI would not appear on their driving record if they entered diversion and then definitely did, like you said, go through their treatment, go through all of that system and making sure that they complete it. So I do think it has some advantages, but I also sometimes think that there are some loopholes. There's just some ways that people can maybe we have found people that have gone through several diversions here in Oregon. So they go through a diversion and then maybe 7-8 years later they get arrested for DUI again, and then it's like, okay, I'm eligible for diversion, or am I? And so where they try to do that. So I think that it does have some benefits to it, as long as we don't let maybe some of those things where they can beat the diversion and make it work to their benefit by doing it more than once.
Yeah, I can agree with that. I mean, my thought process is if you enter into a diversion program, that you should, like in many other crimes, you should be filing a plea of guilty or no contest.
Yes.
And then once you've completed it, then it can be expunged for your record.
So you're saying do that. You're actually then doing that before the diversion. And then if you don't complete the diversion for whatever reason, then it's an automatic conviction.
Yes.
Yeah.
That way there's the accountability piece where they have to complete the drug and alcohol treatment, and they don't get to go back through, because what happens and does happen is they may be arrested today, go into a diversion, fail diversion, and a year from now, say they don't complete it, and so they go back and they go through the process of pleading not guilty and going to trial. Well, the law as it stood today, in a year, may be different.
True.
And therefore, now they can get off on a technicality, and basically they're not being held accountable for their actions.
Yep.
And that's where the problem lies. And DUI laws, we've talked about, have gotten harder and harder over the years to enforce because of case law and different things like that. And I remember as a young rookie, the reason for that is a lot of times, and this may or may not be true, but DUI is a classless crime. It happens and affects everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And the legislatures a lot of times don't want to make DUI laws harder or more strict than they are, because they too could become victim to being arrested for DUI. That's what I was told as a rookie. Whether or not that's true, I've never stopped a legislature under those circumstances, but it does stand to reason, and that's what some people out there may think.
And I guess there could be that conversation. I don't really look at it too much from that standpoint. I look at it from some of the issues. If we're going to have diversion and it's going to be successful diversion, well, then we need to make sure that people that are in diversion are complying, they're following the rules, and they get through the treatment like they're supposed to. And then the other thing that we've seen sometimes with diversion is that you could be on a diversion here in Oregon, but yet you could go across the border and get arrested in Idaho or maybe Washington or some other state for DUI. And then it's like, okay, then what happens? Because we may not know about it here in Oregon, especially the further you get away from Oregon geographically around the country, and you get arrested for DUI in North Carolina, we'll just use that as an example, we may never know about it. And so the person actually violated their diversion, but yet Oregon does not know about that.
Correct.
So there's some areas that need to be kind of, I think someday, looked at for diversion. There are very few states around the country that have a diversion program. We're just one of probably 3 or 4 in the entire country that has gone that route. Think that's going to work good?
That'll work.
Yeah, I don't really know what we're going to see with the legislature. I don't know if there's going to be interest in a .05 per se level. I don't know if there's going to be interest in a phlebotomy program, but I mean, there's other things that we need to look at too. And so one of those is our ignition interlock device program. Unfortunately, Oregon, according to the Oregon State Police who runs the program here, is that we are one of the lowest in the country when it comes to actual compliance of people that are supposed to be using their ignition interlock devices that are doing that. And so that is something we're going to probably have to work on as well.
Go.
Gotta go.
Gotta go.
Way short. Phew. Oh, you're going to like that.
More, go.
You're good.
I was a little worried about that wind. It's pretty stiff right there. You know, Bryce and I were talking to a few minutes ago. His dad was in law enforcement and did a lot of traffic enforcement. And he asked about roadblocks.
Yeah, sobriety checkpoints.
Sobriety checkpoints,
Yeah.
and the fact that Oregon doesn't do them.
No.
You probably know the history a lot better than I do on that.
Actually, I did the very first sobriety checkpoint
Oh,
in
really?
the state of Oregon. I was a sergeant at the time with the Oregon State Police, and so here in Salem, we were allowed to do them, and this was in the early 70s, so mid 70s, and then early 80s. And so I actually held a sobriety checkpoint that we did, and it would have been about 1984, and we did that on Shamawa Road. And so right where Shamawa Road actually crosses over the top of Interstate 5, that's where we did the very first sobriety checkpoint. And so in that checkpoint, we ended up arresting 8 people for driving under the influence, so DUII, and we actually had publicized that and really got it out to the news media that we were going to do a sobriety checkpoint, and all we would say is it was going to be in the North Salem area, but we didn't say exactly where it was. And so, yeah, it was interesting because myself and 7 troopers, and we all made an arrest, and so we had to close up the sobriety checkpoint. But a lot of people we know that came through the checkpoint actually said, hey, we heard you were going to do this, so I got a sober driver driving tonight. And that was good, that was encouraging. But then it was not too long after that there was a Lane County opinion that came out of the courts there that made sobriety checkpoints so illegal, could not do them anymore. So we lost the ability to do sobriety checkpoints here in Oregon. I wish I'd have used a little more club from out there.
Oh my gosh. I can't even fix my ball mark because it's so frozen.
Surprised you even made a ball mark.
Yeah.
Oh,
Ooh, that's
sit
going to
down.
be gone. That's going to be long. Stay.
It's a pretty good putt from there.
Thank you.
Stay up. Well, I'll just take a par. I was hoping for a birdie.
That's a nice one. Nice par. So as far as sobriety checkpoints and getting them back in Oregon, I don't foresee that happening. And there's actually, you know, if you're looking for a great deterrence tool, that was probably one of them, just because people knew that they were going to happen, and so they safeguarded and, you know, had other people drive as a designated driver. But you can't do them all over the state. That's very difficult because it does take a lot of
It takes a lot
personnel.
of manpower, and
Yep. So just doing, I mean, I really think that .05 would be something, if we were to enact that, that would be an excellent deterrent, because people are going to realize it's like, okay, now like Utah, you know, I got to be a little bit more careful about how much I consume and then if I'm going to be driving. And so I think from a deterrent standpoint, .05 is an excellent deterrent.
yeah, I do too. And you know, checkpoints and DUI stuff. You know, you have saturation patrols, which are helpful as well.
Yep.
You know, and I don't want anybody to go out and be drinking and driving. You know, making that type of mistake, especially today where there's so many resources. There's Uber, there's Lyft.
There is.
To get you home after you've been out at the bar for the night or wherever you may be.
Yeah, back in our day, they didn't have those kind of things available to them like they do now.
And so,
Public transportation. That's not good over there. Right in the middle of my swing, I realized that I was cutting in front of you there.
oh, I'm not worried about that.
You parred that last hole. Yeah, DUI enforcement has definitely changed. I'm telling you, I think that's why training these new officers, and of course Oregon's one of the very few states that does the 8 hours of drugs and impaired driving at the basic academy, which is a good thing, because these officers need to know that it's not just alcohol out there causing problems.
Well, yeah, with the drugs and the alcohol, and it really is a serious problem that a lot of people don't realize. And, you know, right before I left Kaiser, we had an incident where a gentleman who had been arrested for drunk driving once before, when he actually, in an incident, killed his brother. I believe it was his brother. But then, you know, a year or two later, maybe slightly longer than that, he was drunk and drove his pickup truck through the side of a house, killing a husband
Yes.
and wife who were asleep in bed.
I remember that case.
And when
yes.
me and my officers got there, he's still on the gas in the truck with the music blaring, still continuing to try and drive his truck through the house, not realizing what he had did.
Right.
And so, it's cases like that, that make things tough, and it's, I mentioned earlier with case law and the different things, it's really tough on officers and smaller departments, because now, like we talked about, if somebody refuses the breath test, district attorneys want the officers to apply for a search warrant to get a blood draw. And we've already talked about the blood draw issues, but what a lot of people don't understand, and what makes it so tough, is a search warrant isn't obtained in 3 minutes like you see on TV. Even with boilerplates and the ability to send them off via email to the DA to review and then the judge to review and sign and issue the search warrant, it still takes the better part of an hour. And the downside to that is, now by the time you get it, over an hour's passed, you're not seeing a true reflection of what the suspect's blood alcohol level is, because it's either went up or it's went down.
Yes.
And not to mention how it hampers police agencies, because some smaller agencies might only have 1 or 2 officers on at a time. Or we'll go to like Kaiser, where we had 4 to 5. Well, if we had 4 on that night and I lose an officer for an hour applying for a search warrant, and it's actually longer by the time,
and you're waiting at the hospital.
We're waiting at the hospital. I might lose an officer, so I'm losing a quarter of my patrol staffing to process the DUI. And that makes it difficult for the rest of the department, where you're trying to serve 40,000 other people in your community. And it only takes a second for your resources to be completely depleted. Mm-hmm. And I know, and it's been said by many judges, we don't care about the amount of time or resources. You can call people in. Well, that still takes time. And so in the grand scheme of things, of trying to save lives, that the amount of time that it takes to do that turns younger officers away from enforcing DUI laws.
Exactly.
And in turn makes our streets unsafe.
Yeah, and it affects your supervisors too, because there are some supervisors that's like, okay, we don't want to mess with that, because just like you said, I'm going to lose that person on patrol, and who's going to answer the calls now? Because you're tied up for 3 or 4, maybe 5 hours on a DUI investigation.
Struggling with the driver today.
Well, you mentioned the dissipation of alcohol when you're waiting maybe in a hospital or someplace like that to get your blood draw. Well, wow, we've really run into that throughout the country and the world, when dissipation of THC in the blood, and it happens so quickly. And so you have to pretty much get that blood drawn for analysis really within an hour, or you are going to lose so much of your evidence, because as soon as that person that's using marijuana or cannabis, that THC level drops so quickly that that's imperative that you get a really quick blood draw whenever you can, especially for those cases.
Which is why we were talking about the importance of, having police officers trained as phlebotomists, because you have to take it quickly. We used to be able to take it on exigency circumstances, but that was when the hospitals were a little more willing to work with us, and there's a whole lot of reasons why they're kind of going away from that. And I'm not going to speak for them, because I don't know what all of their reasoning is, but I feel like something needs to change. Either 1, officers need to be allowed to become phlebotomists to do it themselves, or 2, we just need more buy-in from hospitals, or the legislatures need to pass some laws or OARs to require it to happen.
And I think the best way is to, just like we talked about, is just train police officers to be a phlebotomist, because
they do it in Arizona.
We put too much. It's too much emphasis and too much. It's more work for hospital staff and emergency room staff to try to do those kind of things for us, when really we could make it so much easier on them. And plus, I think we know this too from our past, is that there are some nurses or maybe a lab technician, they know that they may have to get subpoenaed to go to court on it.
Right.
And that's not fair to them.
No, it removes them from that. Burning the edges.
Yep.
So in any of the work or studies that you've seen with, have you seen a noticeable increase in youth impaired driving?
You know, the latest research is actually showing that teen use of alcohol is actually on the decline. But unfortunately, we're seeing some other areas where drugs other than alcohol are starting to make a little bit of an increase. And you'd be interested in this from your old police days, but inhalants we're starting to see an uptick in that. So inhaling substances, and especially with younger people. But a lot of some of the synthetic cannabinoids are also popular. So it's kind of strange, as we know. It's like drugs sometimes, drugs of abuse, they kind of phase out for a while, and then all of a sudden they come back. And so cocaine's a good example of that. Cocaine never really went away, but yet it kind of lost its popularity. So now we're starting to see more of an increase in cocaine. So cocaine is actually we're starting to see more of that through the crime lab and where it's being detected. Methamphetamine's never gone away. LSD and some of those psychedelics, hallucinogens, they're on the increase as well. So here we are going through that period of time now where we're starting to see a uptick in some of those drugs that maybe 10 years ago, they weren't all that popular. But in the schools and the youth, I had an opportunity just in 2023 to actually go back to Nebraska. I was invited to go back and do some training at their Nebraska High School Coaches Association. I thought, okay, this is going to be maybe a couple hundred coaches. I went there and there was 2,000 coaches. And so really to talk to them about what's going on as far as the drugs of abuse, and especially with young people, and quite an eye-opener. I mean, these coaches are seeing that not only in the schools, but definitely with their athletic programs too.
Yeah, it's the kids in the, there's a lot of access to it, and then, there's a lot of kids are vaping.
Oh yes.
Now.
Yeah.
And you can get marijuana in vape pens, and so it's pretty much odorless.
I think that's something that Oregon is going to have to try to get a better handle on, is the vaping. So, and then there's other substances out there that are not illegal that are being abused. So it could be kratom and some of those things as well. And so yeah, some of those things that just easily accessed by our youth, and we need to try to fix that somehow.
Ugh, dead into the wind.
Didn't bother you a bit?
That didn't.
That wind didn't affect that shot at all.
Nope, that was my best one of the day. Where'd my tea go? Oh, back here. Yeah. No, that's Mount Washington through there. Draw a little bit. Oh.
We'll take them though.
This is a good ball. A little shout out to one of our sponsors, Creekside, for allowing us to come out here and film today. And Creekside's got one of the best views in the state of Oregon. Just check out Mount Jefferson in the background there.
Yep, that's a great view today.
Yeah, I don't have 240 in my bag.
Well, that was a good shot, though. You got it over the bunker.
Where did you end up?
Just short of the bunker on the right. We're trying to explore some new areas and get a little bit widen our scope, really, on the advisory committee for DUII here in Oregon. And so trying to find somebody in the mental health aspect of it, trying to find somebody, a defense attorney. We really do need somebody on the committee that does defense work for DUI. That is, so, those are, and then an offender. I mean, we need a DUII offender again. We used to have one, and so those are areas that we're trying to explore our partnerships with a little bit more.
Yeah, can you talk a little bit more about that? I mean, about that makeup, because a lot of people would think about why would you, if you're on the DUII advisory committee and you're trying to make the roadway safer, why would you put a defense attorney? Why would you put somebody that's an offender on the committee?
Well, I think, the Governor's Advisory Committee for DUII was actually formed in 1983, and so at that time it was kind of more enforcement focused, and so I think now that obviously we know that enforcement can't do it all when it comes to deterring impaired driving in the state. So we're kind of looking at the entire wheel, so to speak, and all of the prongs and spokes that really make up the impaired driving issue. And so having an offender on there is a good thing, because we can hear from that offender and tell us, okay, I went diversion, or I went through this treatment and it worked or it didn't work, or we could maybe do a little bit better in that area. A defense attorney, we want to hear from the defense, because obviously there are things maybe that we could be doing better on our side when it comes to enforcement, prosecution, and treatment that maybe we'd only hear from a defense attorney that is representing these people out there. And then from the mental health side or the public health side, definitely need to do that, because as you probably saw in your career, is that a lot of the people that we're arresting for driving under the influence, or maybe have multiple charges against them, they're also suffering from other disorders. And sometimes it's a kind of a combination of maybe some health issues or some mental issues combined with alcohol and or other drugs.
Well, and that was what we learned, or one of the big ones I learned during doing DRE evaluations, is it wasn't always drugs or alcohol that impaired the person. A lot of times there was impairment there because of a mental health disorder. So they weren't under the influence of intoxicants, therefore not necessarily committing the crime of DUI, but they were still impaired where we didn't want them on the roadways.
Yep. The very first drug evaluation that I did once I got certified here in Oregon as the first DRE, the drug recognition I did was for a state police officer, and so he was just sure that this person was impaired. We'd had citizens calling in about their driving on Interstate 5, so we had lots of documentation about really some bad driving. So he ends up doing field sobriety tests. The person could do some, could do not, some he could not do, did not want to do, so he made the arrest. I came and did the drug evaluation, and it was not drugs at all that was causing the impairment. It was from some mental health issues and some mental issues that person was going through. So that saved that person from actually being charged with DUII, because we dismissed any case that we had, those charges for DUII, and actually consulted with the hospital and actually got that person some medical help, which he needed. And so we would have missed that probably without drug recognition experts.
Yeah. .183. That's a good looking ball.
Run hard.
Didn't turn over.
Turn hard. Come on.
Oh well. No hole in one for me today.
So I know as a DRE that you did evaluations on people that really, like you said, there was some impairment there, but it was not related to alcohol and or drugs, or maybe it was a combination of medical or mental with drugs. And so that's where a DRE really, I mean, just all the money that we spent here in Oregon and all the officers that we've trained, I mean, we have saved lives because of DRE. We have got people medical care when they had no idea that they were suffering from a severe medical issue. And then also just from the standpoint of maybe not charging somebody with DUI because maybe the officer saw a lot of indicators at roadside in their driving that would indicate maybe person's impaired, but they weren't impaired by alcohol or drugs.
Right, because it was a health issue.
A health issue.
Or,
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's, the program is vitally important
Yes.
in the state, and I hope that it's able to continue.
I think so. I mean, all 50 states now have the program. We've got them in Canada as well, and we're actually now the International Association of Chiefs of Police, who I worked for after I retired from the Oregon State Police. We're now doing training and getting interest from Mexico and in South America as well to put DREs and train DREs down there. So it's something that is worthwhile. It takes a little while. Not every officer wants to be or is meant to be a DRE because there's a lot of training involved, but yet we probably need to get more here in Oregon because I know we're kind of hovering around that 175 to 180 officers statewide, and we probably need to increase that to by about 50 or 60 if we could. So because there's sure a need for them.
Yeah.
Oh, I think if I hit it, that might have gone in. Give it to him.
Oh. Just a little wide. Yeah, it's pretty interesting that I know, I'm sure, like when I first started, so like, you know, early 90s and then even the beginning of the 2000s, you know, there was a lot of officers were getting 75 to 100 DUI plus arrests a year.
Yeah.
I don't know that anybody is, I don't know, like, I know at least in Kaiser, nobody's even close to that.
We at the DUI conference that they do every year, so they're going to do that again in April over in Bend. There's a DRE from Washington County Sheriff's Office. That guy gets close to 200 DUIs every year.
Really?
And he's not one of those guys that it's like he's just where their other officers or deputies are giving them to him. Plus he's a DRE and he's doing about 35 drug evaluations a year as well. But this guy, he's just a machine. And so he's got the DUI Enforcement Officer of the Year award a couple of times, I think. And so, but yeah, you don't see it too often anymore. And we've had some DREs around the country that have got well over 100, 130 drug evaluations in a year. And that's pretty remarkable in itself right there.
Yeah, it is. I don't remember how many I finished with.
Well, I think one of the last DUI investigations or DREs that was probably in your career was that one that Mike EY and I think helped you on when the guy, the methamphetamine guy that was on his way to work in his work truck, and you got him at like 7 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
I was digging through my drug evaluations the other day and I came across that report and I thought, you know what, I should give that one to Rodney for his files, but you were going to look also through your files to see if you had any interesting cases.
I didn't have any.
We're going to try this again, see if we can do better this time.
I think I was somewhere around 150 evals.
Yeah.
Which isn't a lot, I mean, but what I'm most proud of is my accuracy rate.
Same spot, a little worse this time. Could be in the
that's
bunker. Yeah. Finish with a bunker shot. That's a good shot. That was your patented cut shot right there.
Yeah, that was a good one. I was thinking I was standing over the ball, like, did we go one hole too many?
You got that cut shot. In fact, when I first started playing with you, that's what you were hitting just about with Every iron and every club was that cut shot.
Yeah, it's hard to hit it now. It changed my swing so much that I have that. I get a draw. It's either straight or I get a draw, and my miss is that pull hook.
Yeah.
And
well, that was my miss. As you can see, that was a pull hook.
every once in a while, I can, with the longer clubs, I can get the fade or the little baby cut, but it's not very often. It is fun though. I had one on two. I hit my tee shot fat, and it was back a ways, and I had to cut it around the fir trees of the green. And I actually was able to do it. And I was like,
nice shot in there, Rodney. Yeah.
Like, I don't know. It's fun when you can make you can hit the shot that you're hoping to make. Go.
Little fat.
Good putt.
Is that good? All right. Thanks, Adam. Birdie.
Birdie.
Yeah.
We got one.
That's why you wanted to come back here.
That's why I wanted to come back. Well, Chuck, it was a lot of fun.
Yes.
Want to say again, thank you to our sponsor, Creekside Golf Course, and Danny Moore and all of his help, and Rain Sweater. Josh, sorry you weren't out here today. I hope you feel better soon. And hopefully you'll tune in for our next episode, which will be with retired Sergeant Dan Kelly, as we talk about behavioral assessment, which used to be referred to as threat assessment. So in the lines of DUI, which was our topic today, we hope that everybody drinks in moderation, and that they get a designated driver, and that they're safe out there on the highways.
Yes, for sure. We appreciate that whenever they do that. Thank you.
Thank you.